Okay, we're going to come to order. Today is the Wednesday, December 3rd, regular meeting of the Glendale Planning Commission. Could I have roll call, please?
Commissioner Sheets.
Here.
Commissioner Torgerson.
Here.
Commissioner Lee.
Here.
Commissioner Berman.
Here.
And Chair Kane.
Here. Report regarding posting of agenda, please.
The agenda for this meeting was posted on Wednesday, November 26, 2008, on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. Would you please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Oral communications, I have no cards. Oh, I'm sorry, approval of minutes, first off, of November 19th, 2008. Comments or corrections to be made, gentlemen?
I move that we accept the minutes.
I have a motion to accept. Second, please.
I second.
Motion and support. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Sheets.
Aye.
Commissioner Torgerson.
Aye.
Commissioner Lee.
Aye.
Commissioner Berman.
Aye.
And Chair Kane.
Aye, and a vote of 5-0. The minutes of November 19th were approved. Now, moving on to oral communications. I have no cards for that. We're going to move on to agenda item 6. It's appeal. It's PVAR 2007-036. It's a standards and setback variance, which was continued from April 16, 2008. The location is at 2800 Montrose Avenue. It's an appeal of a denied standards and setback variance to permit or legalize the construction of a ground sign in the required front setback and where a sign is not permitted in the R1650 medium-density residential zone. A ground sign is not a permitted structure in that zone, and the required minimum front yard setback is 20 feet in that zone. Staff is represented by Rather Duong, and there is a recommendation to sustain the zoning administrator's decision and design the appeal application. Now, I also want to note that this item is an appeal from the decision of the zoning administrator, and it is heard as a de novo hearing. Testimony given at the hearing should be repeated because the Commission does not review the tapes of those meetings. Decisions rendered today will be based on the evidence presented at this hearing and the evidence in the file, including appeal documents, staff reports, and letters received. Individuals speaking today should therefore present all the evidence which they may wish this Commission to consider. A handout describing the appeals process is available at the front counter. Appeal items are considered as public hearings. The Commission will consider testimony from the appellant, applicant, staff, and any member of the public wishing to speak. If you wish to speak, please fill out a card and present it to the recording secretary. That said, could we have a staff overview, please?
Thank you, and good evening, Mr. Kane and Commissioners. As stated by you, this case was last heard by the Planning Commission on May 21st, 2008, which the Commission voted to have the case continued. At that meeting, several concerns were raised regarding the proposed wall and signs. Specifically, some of these concerns relates to the height of the wall. As it turns out, because of the height of the wall, a building permit will not be required. Therefore, there was concern whether it would get proper inspections by building and safety staff. Another concern was that the wall was not engineered, the existing wall that's there right now, and it was the desire of the commission to have that wall removed and rebuilt as an engineered wall, and that the proposed wall was too high. At that time, it was proposed at 4 feet 8 inches, and that there's a need to have an engineer or an appellant to provide an indemnity statement holding the city harmless. Those were some of the main concerns that were brought up during that meeting. Since that meeting, the applicant has retained the services of a civil engineer and has designed a wall, designed a new wall, and that wall is 2 feet 8 inches high. So it's 2 feet lower than the proposed wall originally. The sign has been removed as instructed by the Commission since the last meeting. And also, I would like to add that since that time, there was another accident at the same corner that took place on September 11th of this year. And the photographs of that accident was included in your packet as attachment number 11. Yes, that's correct. That's the most recent accident that took place at this property. And also I placed a copy of a more detailed traffic collision report, police report in front of you that did not make into the package. There's another version that was included in the packet as well, but this other one appears to be more detailed. Planning staff also consulted with Traffic and Transportation Division staff as to the type of walls that may be appropriate or can be served as a traffic barrier in this case. Most walls that are employed by Caltrans would not be appropriate as a traffic barrier, and it would not be appropriate in this case. As a courtesy, also staff consulted with the Building and Safety Plan Check Engineer, Ms. Jan Edwards, about the proposed wall. She reviewed the drawing behind you, and that were also included in your packets. Based on her review, she stated that the height of the wall as well as the footing details appear to meet code, but because there was no engineer calculation, she could not give a definitive answer in terms of the structural aspect of the wall. She also stated that the location, size, and spacing of the rebar would play a big role in terms of making a determination whether this type of wall meet building code for such a barrier. While a building permit will not be issued and officially approved with an approval stamp, staff will continue, depending on the direction of the Planning Commission, to work with Building and Safety staff to make sure that the wall meets some sort of standards. The appellant and her engineer, I hope he makes it in time, is in the audience, as well as Mr. Wayne Cove from the Traffic and Transportation Division. And also for the record, staff received 2 emails correspondences from nearby property owners regarding the appeal, and both are against the appeal. And that concludes my overview. If you have any questions, I'm available to answer them. Thank you.
Commissioners, questions for staff? Mr. Torgerson.
Can you refresh our memory, please? Is this an application for a variance to put a sign up, or is it an application for a variance to the setback ordinance to put up a traffic barrier wall inside of the 20-foot setback?
The actual request that came to the city and was heard by the zoning administrators was specifically for 2 variances. One, for a sign in a residential zone where a sign is not allowed, and the second request was for a wall structure located in the setback.
And so this appeal to us is for 2 issues.
Yes,
It's still
Yeah.
what we originally heard.
correct.
It's been since May since I heard that, and my memory's not that long. Just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Were there other questions of staff at this time?
Was
Seeing
the,
none. Oh, I'm sorry.
Existing wall any kind of a factor in the existing wall apparently did not prevent this particular accident.
No, as I look at the accident, they managed to miss the wall and hit the building.
Yeah.
And it also looks like it was a right turn that just continued.
Correct.
Pretty
Going
amazing.
south on Lacra Center.
I think it hesitated and then continued.
It's, yeah,
So she
it's,
turned right and went around the barrier into the apartment.
it's impressive driving. All right. Well, if there's nothing else for staff, we'll continue with the public hearing and let the appellants come forward. I have 2 cards. I think you're kind of together, however you'd like to spend your time and present your case.
Hello there, I'm Tracy Escalona. I am the portfolio manager, and at this point, just a brief history of this. This building has been hit now 4 times, starting in 1981. The first time that we have record of it, all the way until 2003, it was hit twice, and then now just again on September 11th. What we wanted to do initially was to put up the wall, because the bollards were already existing once we purchased the property in 2006. We had just constructed the cement and rebar wall around it, and that's when obviously this whole thing started. just to protect the building. We were going to put our name on it just so it was pretty, but when we came here in May, we just basically requested just to please have something up to protect the property. And that's why we were requested to have the civil engineer do the drawings for us so that we could present those once again, which I obviously have done and you have now. And just back again to plead with you to please allow us to put this up to hopefully prevent yet another accident, because obviously it has happened now 4 times. And chances are, unfortunately, just based off of that, and with the influx of how many people are in La Crescenta and how many people in the traffic conditions, it's, the odds of it happening again are definitely, unfortunately not in my favor. So I would just request that this could be something that we, construct just to protect the property and those residents that are there on that corner, because they're very close to the corner. The building was given a variance in 1972 when it was built to be within that 15 feet, and it was already granted in 72. So, besides moving the building back, which obviously we can't do, I would like to protect my residents. And I would like to protect the general public as well if there happened to be anybody else that's, driving through there. And this was just a very, obvious accident that occurred, but apparently it can happen. And, just within a few months of this has, caused yet again major damage to the property. The residents in the building were there. It happened at approximately 8:15 a.m., so it was a very busy time of day. The residents were still home and were in complete shock and scared to pieces. It was a studio apartment, which would mean that their whole apartment is one room. And they had a car coming into their apartment. And this obviously is something that nobody wants to wake up to. And my job as their property supervisor is to do everything I can to protect them and my property as well. And that's why, obviously, we're here again. So, were there any questions?
Mr. Lee?
If I heard you correctly, then Commissioner Torgerson, in the beginning asked if there are 2 parts to this appeal. And what I heard just from you is that you just want to protect the property.
Yes.
So you are foregoing the request of the putting up the sign?
Yes. On May 21st, when we were here last, the final part of that was that we had a temporary sign, which is in that picture, just a banner, just a simple vinyl banner, just to identify the building. We needed something that showed the name and so that people knew what the building was. So we had, put that up just as a temporary, and the next morning it was taken down. And so now it's just the way it is. You see it just plain. And all I want now is just a barrier. I will do what I have to do to comply.
Yeah, if I could interject, since this is a de novo hearing, meaning that things we were talked about before really
Right.
haven't been put in front of us, there's a couple things I'd like to do. One, when this was first presented, the commissioners at that time kind of signaled that they would have strong opposition to the sign. And the appellant readily, said they had no problem with that. So I'm glad that you confirmed again that even though the sign is listed as part of the
Yes.
process, that you're really backing away and you're really just trying to find a way to legalize the structure that you want to put in place.
Yes. I mean, technically, we just had done thought and afterthought of putting the name on it. Just is, it would be pretty. It would have been nice. It would have looked good. It would have made the wall a little more useful than just having an ugly wall in the front of the building. So it was, and, at the initial also, that it was never 4 feet 8 inches, just so you know, that what's there now is not even, I think, 36 inches, but the civil engineer that we had did it at 2 feet 8 inches. So it's, not too tall. It's going to be, not anything that's going to, scream out. We were just going to cover it in slate piles just so that it blends nicely with the building. And
Is that what's planned?
Yes.
Okay, that was actually one of my questions for you.
Yes.
So you're going to cover it in slate, just on the exterior side, I presume?
We probably would just cover the whole thing so it's protected, so that the cement on the back doesn't get water damage. We do have landscaping behind it, so we would want it to be a complete project, so it looks like it's supposed to be
So
something.
fully wrapped?
Yes.
Because what I saw in the information, since it was prepared by a structural engineer, really didn't deal with finishes.
Okay, yeah.
Or if it did, I didn't see it.
I didn't see that. One more question is,
Sure. Please.
you had designed this structural wall right up, but right up against the sidewalk.
Yes.
What I'd like to see is that, because the way it is right now, and I pass by there every day because I live up on the hill there. It is the structure is it's kind of it's not a pretty sight.
Right.
And even with the your tile work, I'd like to see that whole structure maybe if possible, move back 8 to 12 inches back, so that you can have some sort of a plantation in the front, so that, it'll make the wall a little bit nicer.
Absolutely, we're willing. We just, like I said, initially had just created the wall around what was already existing from the prior ownership that had already put the bollards in. We just went with that and covered around it. So that's, we went with what we had to work with. And I'm sure that obviously won't be a problem. We want it to be aesthetically pleasing. We want it to be something, that's why, we initially had thought, put the name on it, put lights shining up on it, make it very pretty. Because the building, as you can see from the time, the first pictures you have until now, we've made a considerable amount of improvements that have really made, that corner very pretty. A whole new paint job, all new windows, and, have really done a lot to the property. So it would be in our best interest, as well as the community, to have it look good. So, yeah, that can be done, no problem.
So step one, first off, is the existing barrier wall is going to be removed in its entirety.
Absolutely, once we have,
Okay.
this is, we have already gotten bids from construction companies to do it.
So if approved, okay. Yes, Mr. Berman.
Is the property on the other side the same height as the street sidewalk? When I look at the building, the wall just makes the building look bad because it cuts out the windows.
Because it's down,
about 1
it is
foot
set down.
Yeah, if it's down another 2 feet or something, it would sure help improve the looks of the building.
Do you know what the height is of the current building, the current wall, rather?
It's,
that
the
curve
wall
right
there
there,
in that
yeah.
picture is not even 3 feet high.
So you don't have to know what that height is.
I don't know it off the top of my head. Do you have that, Rob?
Actually, Chairman
The
Kane,
existing one.
the drawings,
Well, that's what I want to get a sense of.
Yeah.
Right now, what is it?
the drawings to your left identifies the height. It's 4 feet 8 inches.
Right. So what they're already talking about, Mr. Berman, is reducing
Not
it
that
to
high.
2'8".
Oh,
Just to clarify that.
that's fine.
Well, the last hearing, they'd said 36 inches was the max, but my civil engineer went with the 2 feet 8, which was fine with me, as long as it was going to work. Just basically want it to do what it's supposed to do. And even though the last incident, occurred with it not working, I was about ready to put a whole building, just wrap the building up with one of these walls, but obviously that won't work. So we'll just hope to do something to help, show that we have, due diligently tried to protect our property and the residents.
Okay, so in the first hearing, you, not only did you decide not to put up the sign, but you've also decided not to remove the existing structure and respond again to previous concerns that were stated in terms of its height, in terms of its structural capabilities, and so on. In other words, that's what this plan has shown us now.
Right.
Okay. And again, I'm just trying to, because it was a continuation, I'm trying to
Right.
cover some activity and some conversation that we had had before.
The reason I asked about the other side is because normally 3'6", what you need for a wall, so you don't fall over it or onto a lower location on a balcony and so forth.
If there was a fall hazard, yes.
Well, it's just landscaped right behind it, just on a slight grade down, and it's all landscaped and just the balcony of the apartment right there is right there behind it.
I see the top of the windows of the door on the other side. I'm gauging it from that.
The bottom floor of those front apartments is below grade.
Right.
Right, but directly behind the barrier is almost at grade landscaping.
Yeah.
I guess, which kind of answers his part. So.
Well, yeah, what the structural engineer...
Slopes gradually.
Slope.
What the structural engineer shows in his efforts was a 1.5 to 1, I think. Yeah, which you may not necessarily have. You can't be any greater than that. Yours is probably a little more shallow.
Right.
Which, that's fine. Other questions initially for the applicant? Or the appellant, I'm sorry.
I do have a question.
Go ahead.
If this is the proposed wall right here, it's a little hard to see. But apparently this last accident, she came in and
Yes.
went around it. Have you talked to the traffic department at all to get an idea of where the most likely impact zones are for this corner?
Well, I have not done that. I have not spoken to them, but all of the
Just be
other
extended a
accidents
little
were
bit.
on that corner because the other 3 accidents that I am aware of and have record of were basically someone who is going south on La Crescenta Avenue and went straight into the building going the other direction.
Down the hill.
Yeah, it would be the other direction.
It's actually
They
down,
cross.
there's a slope.
Right,
Sorry,
they're
yeah,
going
the north
straight
is
down.
up. Okay, so they're going south, they're
Yes.
coming down this way, and they go, whoops.
Well, they just, they just go straight in, and the property does, it's right there at the corner of Montrose Avenue and La Crescenta, and that was that was the last two incidents for sure that I'm aware of where it impacted those units, because I have record also of the residents in those units directly that, you
It
know,
is downhill, going down.
Yeah.
were there when it was hit during that time.
Well, maybe this last one where she just turned right and just kept on turning.
Exactly. Literally, she barely hit. I mean, if the wall had been another maybe 2 feet, she may have gotten, you know, the wall instead, and it would have made a difference. But it's just my luck. So.
Well, that's what I'm just, reason I'm bringing it up is it might make sense to extend that a little bit.
Right.
So
If we're allowed to, I would love to. I mean, I just don't know. The last, you know, obvious hearing was May 21st, and we had already had the structural engineer draw up the drawings right after that time, and I submitted them. You know, it was all before we had this accident. So, you know, if we could make it, because at the time we were told we could have it the same length, the wall could be the same length, it just had to be shorter. So that's what we went with, and if we, you know, if we can bring it down, you know, a couple more feet, that would be very helpful.
And also, Commissioner Torgerson, Mr. Wayne Cole may be able to answer some of your questions regarding where traffic and transportation may come into this.
Okay. I have no further questions.
Anything else from staff? Okay, or from commission, I'm sorry. I would note that the application for variance was prepared by David Mercer, and within that sheet, one of the things we have to do is make findings. And I note that the application has 4 findings listed, and I would, if they haven't already gotten it out, I'd suggest to my fellow commissioners that they review those, and if we're predisposed to grant the variance, we're going to want to reference those and see if they're indeed defensible. And if you don't want to grant the variance, I would urge you to look those over so we can debate that they are inadequate. And I'm talking about a piece of paper that looks like this. If you have it in your packet. Did Ms. Fiola want to speak as well?
I'd like her to. She was the manager. She's on site. She was the one who was with the resident once this happened. So.
Would she like to speak? I mean, you have your time period here. Go ahead, please.
Good evening. My name is Ashley Fiola. I am the property resident manager. I'm just basically want to speak to you of the day of the accident. I know we've kind of gone over this whole thing, but I was notified by the resident. She came to my door in a panic. Obviously, there was a car butted up against her window. She lives, like Tracy mentioned, in a studio, so basically that's just a very big bedroom. Every morning she prepares her day's work right at that window, and that morning she happened to be at the computer. So she was pretty lucky because the impact of the car actually pushed the window frame in. Very luckily, there was no breakage of glass or anything, but she was sitting right there. Their bed is right there by the window. So I'm just basically sitting up here with an appeal that, granted, this particular accident was not prevented due to our traffic barrier because she did just make a very, very bad right turn.
Pretty unusual.
But as I spoke with the officer that arrived on scene first and the fireman who was there, they noted the same thing, that if, you know, the wall maybe had been extended out a little bit, she probably would have nicked that. Instead, it looked like what she did was when she made her turn, she hit the curb, and the curb kind of just propelled her forward. Again, I'm a resident of the building. I know my tenants very well. I make it a point to know them and kind of get to know their lives a little bit. And so I do take it as a personal issue that if there's anything we can do to plead with you to get this taken care of, especially on those units right there by the street. The traffic is very fast. It's very constant. There's really not a quiet time. It's like living on a freeway. I mean, the only thing I can think of would be to put a stoplight to slow people down. Once they get off that freeway, there's no stopping them, really, until they hit Honolulu, which is the next stoplight. So, as I said, as the manager, I'm just pleading on a more of a personal level. Tracy's given you a lot of the technical. You have all the paperwork. But I was there that morning with this resident who was as white as a ghost, couldn't stop shaking, was visibly scared. And and told me at that point, we hear cars all the time. We worry all the time that someone's going to crash into our place. So, again, that's just, since I was with her that morning, I'm just letting you know more so how it feels to be living right there.
All right.
Questions or?
Nothing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Moving through the process, does staff have any comments, anything to add beyond to what the appellant has already stated?
No, I think they have restated everything that may be of interest to you in terms of this application.
And did you have someone from traffic here?
Yeah, Mr.
Yes,
Wayne
Wayne
Coe
Coe.
is here from Traffic and Transportation.
Why don't you approach, please, sir?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, I'm Wayne Coe. I'm the Principal Traffic Engineer for the Traffic and Transportation Division. I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
What is keeping the city from taking action to slow traffic down at the intersection of Montrose and
Well, actually, Montrose is a major arterial. It carries a lot of traffic. Yes, the street is pretty wide, and speed on occasion is high. The thing is, I have looked at the accident reports for both incidents at this location, and there's really no correlation between one accident and the other. I cannot even see a pattern, a common pattern that indicate a problem in this area. It's a typical intersection. We look at it.
it's an uncontrolled intersection?
It's a signalized intersection.
Oh, there's a
Signalized intersection, yes. So 4 intersections in 27 years, 27 years is unfortunate, but it's not a alarming rate. We have, because it does carry a lot of traffic at that intersection.
Was it as a
Statistically
relief?
speaking, it's not alarming. If you lived in the
Yeah, right.
Yes.
apartment, it would be alarming.
Right.
Mr. Coe, I do drive down that La Crosena. I'm not very much concerned with the Montrose going east and west, but coming from north to south, and I do travel from getting off the 210 freeway. I head down south on La Crosena, and it is downslope, road, and I could see where, if one person would come down, they could speed up, quite a bit, passing through that area. Is there anything that your department could do to, kind of control the speed through that area, or?
Well, actually, for major arterial, of course, the best way to control speed is through enforcement. Also, that location is involved County of Los Angeles as well. Actually, the city borderline is in that vicinity. We'll definitely take a look at the accident history for the whole stretch of roadway and see if there's something that we can do, but definitely we need to work with County of Los Angeles to do something about it. We have speeding on major arterials all the time. Unfortunately, you do want to facilitate the traffic flow because you carry a lot of traffic. On the other hand, a lot of traffic calming devices are not applicable for a major arterial. Speed humps and chokers and that type of stuff are not appropriate for something like this. And it's also a major emergency response route. So we do not want to slow down the traffic too much.
And we need uniformed traffic calming devices.
That's correct.
Yeah, because what I do see is that sometimes if I go down the other way, come down the hill on the other side.
Ocean View?
No.
Pennsylvania.
Is that also Canada Road?
Kenyatta.
Right.
There is a little flashing speed limit, signage right before you get on mountain to get on the freeway. That might work, for warning people of, speeding.
Right. We find out signs like that will work on a temporary basis. And that's why what we have been doing now is to rotate some signs. Some of the portable signs actually will mount on power pole temporary for a month or two. And basically to educate the drivers how fast are they driving. And then we'll rotate to a different location, and then we'll come back again. So then every time when there's a new device come in, they kind of pay more attention. Eventually, it just becomes part of the streetscape. So the effect kind of dies down if you have it permanently installed.
Yeah, people use it for speedometer calibration.
As a matter of fact, yes, we actually have to turn it off.
It is amazing how fast I can get from the stoplight to that sign.
We actually have to we have to program it to turn off at certain speed because teenagers tends to race to 99 miles per
Yeah,
hour.
there we
trying
go.
to get, yeah.
Oh, that's why I can never break 100. Okay.
So, well, this intersection should be on that rotation schedule in any case, I believe.
We'll definitely look at that, yes.
It's challenging because of that downhill slope. Did you have something?
Just in addition, I don't think that intersection is the only one in La Crescenta that would have this problem, but I know that the structures at other intersections would probably be different. It wouldn't be something as close to that corner. But I think my concern will be, this issue on this corner with this structure is unique, but it's a structure on a downhill slope that has a major intersection. There's going to be speed at that intersection, at Ramsdale, at La Crescenta, at all of those streets. So I think, in thinking ahead, I'm wondering what the situation will be and what we could do for signage and flashing lights at those intersections and whether it would be appropriate or not. I still believe whether it's the sign with the speed readout or just flashing lights and maybe signage that would kind of highlight to somebody coming down the hill, you need to slow down.
Yes. As a matter of fact, we have ordered additional, what they call it, radar speed display signs to be deployed in different parts of the cities, and definitely we
Because
can.
any hill area, even down in the lower part of Glendale, you're going to have that on the hills.
You're absolutely correct, yes.
Coming
For actually anything in the Montrose area,
Correct.
all the downhill street, they have that type of issues, yes.
Any other questions for the speaker? Seeing none, thank you very much, sir. We appreciate you
right, thank
stopping
you.
by. Anything else from staff?
No.
All right. As you have a rebuttal period, I don't know that there's much to rebut. I know your engineer is here. He's welcome to speak, or he can be in reserve if we have further questions for him. You came all this way, you want to get a couple minutes in, so.
From Orange County.
Oh, boy.
No, we'll ask you a lot of questions then.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is George Castillo. I'm a licensed civil engineer, state of California, practicing since 1982. My office is 2121 West Imperial Highway, number 403, La Habra, California. And basically, I was contracted to design a wall there. Basically, it's not a signage wall. They asked us not to put any signs on it, but it meets code in terms of its being 32 inches high. I did, we're really not retaining any soil there, not much above, the 32 inches, none at all, as a matter of fact. But I designed it with extra steel and to kind of meet, you really can't anticipate the impact loads. I mean, the impact loads, you're right, it is on a downhill slope, and there could be an accident there, but there is, traffic signals, there's signalization, it's an intersection, it can get pretty busy, cars do come pretty fast, but it is what it is. I think, the issue there is really when the building was allowed to be, built there probably 30, 40 years ago, that it was probably a little bit too close to the right-of-way there. And I think they're only like about 8 feet behind the right-of-way. But it's an 8-foot wide sidewalk there at the point. So you have about 16 feet between curb and gutter and the actual face of the building. So our little 2-foot 8-inch wall actually goes down about 6 feet. I mean, from the top of the wall to the top of the footing, it's about 6 feet. We do have 12-inch block at the bottom. The bottom 2 feet is 12-inch block. The upper section of it is 8-inch block, and I've revised the plan slightly just to add a little bit beefier steel, both horizontally and vertically. We were calling out number 4s at 24 inches on center. Now we're using number 5s at 16 inches on center, just to give us a little bit more beef. But I mean, you really can't design it like an AASHTO highway, type of K-rail thing. You really can't, or a Caltrans, I mean, you could really, but it would take up so much space and basically ruin their whole little planter area. It can be done. I mean, you can put a nice, hefty wall there, but, I mean, who knows? I mean, I've heard where there's an accident, somebody will complain, hey, that wall was too strong, and it was over-designed, and somebody got killed because the wall was too strong. So, I mean, you really can't, fight. I mean, you can't anticipate what's going to happen. I mean, if a big truck comes, down that road and, loses its brakes, and, yeah, I mean, accidents are going to happen. I mean, it's really tough to design for impact loads based on what's unforeseen, hypothetically. But we did beef it up, and like I said, it's designed with, I believe it was like 80 PSF horizontal loads, so that it can withstand, some significant, and that's what AASHTO kind of recommends for your loading on a bridge type of a rail. But so I mean, we do have, like I said, we have more steel than we need, and we're using 2,500 psi concrete, so it's pretty stiff for a garden wall. I mean, it basically serves the purpose as being a garden wall. Not necessarily a protection device, but it will protect to a certain extent.
Questions for questions for the speaker?
Mr. Carson. The Caltrans barriers are designed, as I understand it, with the angle at the foot, so that if a vehicle hits it, the tire will actually be deflected, and it'll turn the vehicle away from the barrier. And it's an integral part of that design. Would it not be possible to incorporate some feature like that in this design? There.
I think so, except it wouldn't be a block design. It would be basically a formed concrete. It'd be formed. We'd have to form it in place instead of blocks. But yeah, we could do that if you like. We could definitely make that kind of bridge. Is that okay with you? I mean, that kind of a.
My concern is that I personally wouldn't want to approve a garden wall if it's not going to serve the purpose of protecting the apartments. There's no point in having it, and unless somebody can come and say this is definitely going to be a reasonable protection, and maybe it will deflect cars away from the structure. I mean, if it serves the purpose of actually protecting the structure of the apartment building, and that's another story. But if it's just a straight vertical garden wall and nobody can really say that it's going to keep a car from crashing into the poor people that live in that corner unit, I think we're wasting our time.
Well, my observation on that would be, and jump in as well, there's a certain by gosh and by golly to whatever we do.
Sure.
I mean, what's the speed of the car? What's the height of the car? What kind of car is it? The mass of the car, the height of the car, the speed of the car.
Yeah, you're obviously not going to protect against a runaway tractor-trailer rig.
At some point, all you can do is what you feel is a reasonable step. And if this is a reasonable step, great. If we need to consider something greater to satisfy you, that's understood as well. But there's so many variables at that point, okay. Now we've decided to add a little bevel or cant to the slope and make it cast-in-place concrete. Okay, now do we make it a 12-inch thick wall or an 18-inch thick wall? Do we, there's so many variables.
That's my argument. There's no engineering behind this wall. It's just kind of a nice wall.
No, there's engineering behind the wall. The question is, at what point will it fail?
There's no engineering to show that it will achieve the objectives that the wall is required to achieve.
What are those objectives?
To protect.
Well, what's this? What's the speed of the car? I mean, at that point, what kind of
if the traffic department would say that the average likelihood of an accident is somebody overturning like the last one, or having a traffic collision at the intersection and a car deflects off in that direction, then I'd say the most likely scenario is going to be a 3,000-pound car going at 30 miles an hour. I mean, the traffic department would be the ones to have to come up with something like that. 3,000-pound car going at 30 miles an hour, heading in there. What's it take to deflect that car and keep it out of the apartment?
Versus 99 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Right.
Truck driver, who knows?
But I mean, from an engineering standpoint, you have to have the requirements established for which you are going to design.
I don't think you can design any wall for any direct impact, because there's no wall that's going to withstand that. I think the whole purpose is, like you said, is to deflect the car.
Right.
You know,
Our traffic person is not his.
and
Well, he was just
you know,
nodding, yeah.
so
If you have a right angle wall, if something hits it, it's going to bounce back. If you have an angle, it's going to be a hill for it. It's going to go up and over.
A ramp?
Yeah. I'm exaggerating, but it's still.
Well, the freeway barriers have an angle at the bottom, and it's designed to deflect the tires.
that's a parallel, because the cars are traveling.
The cars don't go over it. That's the whole purpose of that angle at the bottom, is to keep the cars from going over the barrier into the opposing traffic.
But they're, again, as they pointed out, they're traveling chiefly parallel.
Parallel, yeah, to the wall.
Just direct them
Well,
forward.
go out and look at the accidents you see in the freeway. Mostly, there's a collision and some guy gets pushed and he hits that wall pretty. You look at the marks. There's a lot of really head-on, shallow end.
Well, let me put it this way, and I don't know that you want to stick your neck out too far, but when you design this wall, I mean, why did you design it with the 8-inch block? I see you've already beefed up the rebar, which is a good idea, but why did you go 8-inch block instead of 12 all the way up? I mean, where did you stop and start? What were you trying to design for?
Basically, I was designing for like I said, the impact load that Caltrans equates to. It's like a 80 PSF equivalent load. It's actually 250 pounds something, but you can distribute it over. It becomes 80 PSF. So that's basically. I ran my numbers again, and it'll work with the loads that we have. I mean, with respect to what AASHTO, American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, recommends for certain type of. Those are the walls that they recommend on bridges and stuff. You know, like Mr. Kane is saying. That bevel on the bottom of a wall is typically for parallel type traffic. You know, you get that situation where it throws it back into the lane. A direct impact that might, say, like Mr. Berman say, cause it to even, do some type of which it probably wouldn't, because the center of the hit is below the bevel, is above the bevel part. So it would act something like that. I mean, I'd be willing to, like I said, redesign the wall, make it almost like a K-rail design. I mean, it's going to be a lot of concrete. I mean, the other alternative is to put posts there. Basically the
Bollards.
The bollards, yeah. Put several bollards there, which would be pretty unsightly, I think. I mean,
But so you did design to a Caltrans standard.
Yeah. But I mean, again, in engineering, one of the things I learned a long time ago was, when in doubt, make it stout. And it just so if the computer program's telling me to use a certain amount of rebar, a certain distance, you know what? Let's make the rebar a little bit one size bigger, and let's reduce the distance by 50%. Those kind of things. If it's calling out this. So that's what I did. I mean, when I first put that together, it was sufficient, but knowing that I was going to come here and talk to the Planning Commission and perhaps even, discuss, some type of, like, again, hypothetically, I don't know of a tanker's going to go down that hill, with gasoline and blow up the whole thing, and, they're going to come after me or something. So my little wall wouldn't protect against that anyway.
Right.
But again, it was just taking out a wall that was there that was kind of unsightly, because it looked like it was not
Cobbled together.
Yeah, it just didn't look good, and putting down the proper footings, an engineered footing, and an engineered design. But again, it's not the purpose of that is truly it's a garden wall, because it's above grade, but it's designed as a retaining wall, assuming there was a lot of pressure pushing against it, which there isn't. So it is an engineered wall, but it's engineered for an equivalent pressure that's assuming that it equates to what the AASHTO manual recommends, which would be an 80 PSF equivalent.
Which is what they recommend for a bridge rail.
Yes, right. So, I mean, again, I can redesign it, make it a form wall where we form it and maybe make it even look kind of like a K-rail type of wall, which might it's a very good suggestion.
What happens, because I noticed that in your drawing that you are filling the cells with the rebars in there, only the cells with the rebars. What happens
Oh, I think it's fully grouted, isn't it?
It's fully grouted, yeah.
Is it?
Oh, yeah, it's fully, if you read the general notes on top of it.
Yes, what I see here is that all cells containing reinforcing.
Yeah,
or
yeah,
otherwise
it's
shall be filled with
totally-
solid with ground.
Totally reinforced
Yeah.
with concrete, yes.
So now, then, not only where the reinforcements are, but the other cells are grouted
Oh,
also?
yeah, everything is. it's
The whole thing is
completely
grouted,
The whole thing is
100%,
fully
okay.
grouted.
I guess it's where otherwise noted.
Okay.
Yeah,
What I saw was just the...
It's in the retaining wall notes. I think
So maybe
it's-
you might want to, make the notes so that the all cells will be grouted.
Yeah, it's on the notes, I think it's there. In fact, I mean.
Because my interpretation of this is that only the cells with the reinforcement bar.
Two or three.
No, am I reading it wrong? Or?
You know what? You could certainly interpret it the way you did.
Yeah.
It's note 6.
All cells containing reinforcing.
Okay.
Or
where otherwise noted
Yeah.
shall be filled solidly with
So,
ground.
what I-
I can definitely take out the otherwise noted
But he
also.
also says solid grout.
Okay.
So I
So
think
just-
that's where the otherwise
So
noted
maybe if
falls.
you can, modify your notes.
Yeah, but then where Mr. Kane pointed out down here, it says 8-inch concrete solid grout. Yeah, so all of them is solid grout.
Okay.
But I will modify that to take that.
If we decide to approve it, we'll just make that a condition.
Sure.
Since he's already doing it, that's an easy one. Other questions at this time for the engineer? All right, I don't have anything right now
Thank you
for you,
very
sir.
much.
Anything else for your last say? Have you said what you needed to say? All right, fair enough. I don't have any other cards. I'm going to close the public hearing, and we'll enter into deliberation and comments from the commissioners.
I have a question from Mr. Dong. Is there any, because I know that their limitation was, the length of the wall was, to replace existing ones there. Is there any limitation as to, because they talked about the
Yes.
recent accident going around the barrier, so how far can they go, and what is their limitation?
The main point of discussion at the last meeting was over the height of the wall, not how long the wall may be. But I did notice that the existing plan shows a wall that is about 17 feet 9 inches long. The proposed plan, the proposed drawings by the civil engineer is 14 feet, about a little bit over 14 feet long.
An eighth inch less, yeah.
Yes, so there's it's a decrease. So, but that was not a direction from staff.
Actually, excuse me, if you look on the construction notes over the wall, note 2 says construct walls per detail on the sheet, length equals 20 feet. So
You've got an L 13.98.
Yes, I'm looking.
No, that's the radius of the street, of the right-of-way, that's the actual radius of the right-of-way.
The radius is 15.
I mean,
The
not
curved
radius,
portion.
That's the length of the arc curve of the right-of-way.
It's the length of the arc.
Yeah, that's just
Okay,
the
that's
length
not
of
the
the arc.
length of the wall.
The actual wall, if you look here on note 2, it says it's a
beginning to
20-foot long wall. I just, see how I show the northings and
You
the
got
bearings and everything?
3 feet of straight section on either end.
Yes, yes, it's
All
actually like almost like 4 feet or 3
Oh, there it
yeah,
is.
3
Got
feet
it.
each.
I guess what we're saying is that if you wanted to make it a little bit longer to feel, make your client feel a little safer, because apparently the last accident, they went around the wall to hit
Yeah,
the...
if you want to go, we could, I mean, again, I thought one of the issues with the wall was it was very unsightly, and it was like a nuisance-looking wall, but it's actually a practical wall. It's a wall that's meant to, I mean, we could increase the length maybe 5 feet more on each wing, just to give you, more protection. But yeah, currently it's a 20-foot long wall.
And by the way, I actually reopened the public hearing about a minute and a half ago for this purpose.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. And before I close it, I did want to note that we did have 2 letters in opposition. However, their opposition focused on the concept of a sign on the wall. And I just wanted to put that into the record. All right, I'm reclosing the public hearing, perhaps for the final time. And we'll continue with commissioner comments, conversation, observations. And why don't we start with you today?
Okay.
You guys often.
Left my glasses this time.
Yep. Where are my notes? Here.
Well, I see you brought your glasses.
Yes, I did. I did read through this thing, and there was Traffic and Transportation Department's study in this area. So, city has done their due diligence to investigate the area, and we heard from Mr. Coe again, regarding the intersection. And since the opponent has removed one of the conditions in the appeal, which I think was an issue from my part. As far as the strength of the wall, even though I do have an engineering background, I'm not an civil engineer, and I do trust that when engineers do design these things, they took in a lot of consideration, and they also made a reference to the Caltrans specification. So, I like to see this wall actually, like I said in the beginning, not really butted up against the sidewalk, but actually recessed back into the property, maybe 8 inches back or 12 inches back, so there's some dirt in front of the
planning area.
Planning area, so that the wall looks a little better. It's because there's some plantation in the front. Even though it has a storm facing, I think that might look better. So
soften it.
Soften it, yes. So yeah, I recommend to put up the wall for the for the residents that will live there.
Okay, so I'm kind of keeping a running tally in terms of conditions and feelings about it. So, of course, no on the sign, which they're agreeing to anyway.
Yeah.
Yes on the wall, pretty much as presented, but pushing it back about 12 inches from face of sidewalk.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Berman, would you like to go next?
Well, I'm an architect, and all we do is make pretty pictures. So I wanted it to look good. And I'm glad that you lowered the wall and so forth, so you can see more of the building.
Thank you.
And the rest of it is engineering, so I'll leave it to them. What? I don't care what you put on it. Well, I do, but I mean, what type of terrace? Are you doing Venetian tile or slate or slate? Is it squares or? Will I go around the curve okay?
Yeah, what size? Obviously, it needs to be small enough to handle the radius of the. Okay, but in general, against the sign, or against the sign that they're not doing anyway, but you're okay with the wall as presented.
I wouldn't mind a sign if it's some nice brass letters or something dignified,
Okay.
Or something.
Well, we'll see if anyone can support that concept in the course of our conversation. We may give them more than they want, but I doubt that. So, all right. Anything, Mr. Foy?
I would just say, if you feel like it, you could leave the finished materials to the satisfaction of the urban designer.
Because he has nothing else to do.
Well, they would just look at what's on the building now.
Well, he probably needs to get up into the Montrose area once in a while anyway. So. All right, that's a possibility. Thank you, Mr. Foy. Anything else, Mr. Berman?
No.
No? Okay. Gentlemen? Mr. Sheets.
You ready?
I'm calling on you, Mr.
All right.
I hate to see the two of you spat.
I left my glasses at home. I didn't.
They're on your head.
They didn't do that last week.
Oh my.
Couple quick comments. I truly have not made up my mind on this, but I had a lot of thoughts when I read it, and some of the thoughts came back. So I'm going to play the devil's advocate a little bit about this issue. Because I truly see the need of something happening at this corner. But thinking about it on the larger perspective, larger scale, there's no current code. In fact, the code does not allow it. So thinking through that, the latest action went around the wall. Relative to the comments that happened up here with Mr. Kane and Mr. Lee and the civil engineer, there's no way to know speed, impact. You can't anticipate what's really going to happen. on that corner or other corners. It's not just this corner in La Crescenta. There are other corners. Having worked up there for about 10 years and driving up and down those hills all day long, there's a lot of things that can happen at those corners, and I'm not sure this is going to fix all of that. I think we should use this as an example for future. I think the staff should use this as an example for future variances for setbacks, because now we know that that probably should have been considered by the original architect. I know that's going back a long way, but this is a critical issue. And how do you set standards for this? I have a little concern about going out and making a wall for this. We just engineered this wall about 15 different ways from Sunday, and I don't know whether that's enough. I don't know whether that's right. I don't know whether that's wrong, and that concerns me a little bit. What are the standards? How do you know where to stop? How do you define what's needed? You just really can't be sure that it's enough here, and I think we did discuss that. What happens if this barrier doesn't stop the next accident? Where do we go? What does that lead to? What situation does that create? And I think I wrote a note, but I think this was discussed in addition to letting the staff decide what would be the appropriate treatment. I think we should let the staff decide with some educated involvement how long the wall should be. I think that needs to have some technical aspect, technical involvement. Otherwise, depending on who you talk to, it might be all the way down to the next street by the time we're done with it. And I guess summing that up a little bit, I'm worrying about the precedent that it might set. So having said all of that and listened to the positive input from everybody, I'm undecided.
Fair enough.
At this moment. But I see the value. I see the effort that's been put into this. I understand the concern. And I personally feel there's a need to do something. But I'm going to listen to everything before I make my final decision. That's it.
Mr. Torgerson.
Now you have to.
Now I have to talk.
Yeah.
You want me to pass the guy?
When I was in college, my apartment was right next to a freeway off-ramp that curved, and every time it rained 4, 5, 6 times a year, you'd hear and a 80 PSF guardrail that Caltrans had up on that off-ramp kept the cars from coming into my apartment because I was right on the corner. And I was the first person that the victims of the missed turn would come to, pre-cell phone days, knock, knock, knock. So I'm very sympathetic with the need for something like this in a location like this. This is a prime case of why variances, I'm about to recommend granting a variance to correct a variance that shouldn't have been granted years ago. It's a unique situation. While I'm against the idea of a sign, the idea of a small, something that's going to be unobtrusive and hopefully attractive and engineered to at least the horizontal loading specified for bridge railing is probably a good idea. So I would agree with everything Mr. Lee said, condition-wise, along with, I'd add the condition that the length of the overall length of the wall be coordinated with the traffic engineer. Recommended. There's no point in going to the extra expense of building extra wall if it's not going to do anything for you. On the other hand, if the traffic engineer thinks that maybe accident scenarios would likely make it more effective if you extended it 2 feet or 3 feet to the north. So the condition would be just have the traffic engineer go over the plans and take a look at that location and recommend correct length. And
is that something traffic is willing to do?
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. We can, yes, we definitely, you can take a look at that, but with the last accident in '08, with the driving habit like that, is no limit as to where you cannot get into accident.
I believe the direction is to use your best
Professional judgment.
best professional judgment or opinion
Right.
as it relates to it.
Okay.
With the intent, and however we put it through, with the intent or the emphasis that it's an opinion, that in no way your input should obligate the city, something along those lines.
That will be fine, yes.
Okay, thank you. Continue. Sorry to interrupt.
That's, I think I've said everything I need to say.
Okay.
I would have one thing that came to mind. We didn't talk about it. I assume it's going to be in this package, but the owner to provide the indemnity statement, that will be, has that been agreed upon, or do we still have to add that in there? Because I think that's critical relative to this structure and what it may or may not accomplish. I don't see it on the motion.
No, but that's a good...
No, that could be added as a condition
It has
if
to
you
be,
wishes.
yes.
And then before, Mr. Garcia, before I call for the motion and a vote, please interrupt me and tell me if you think we should continue it for findings to be prepared. If you're worried about any legal verbiage or anything that needs to get into it before we vote. In other words, we could always do like with what council does and come back in 2 weeks with the actual stuff if you're nervous about what we might be exposing the city to.
No, I think we're okay with the findings and with respect to the conditions as it relates to the indemnity and as it relates to the condition suggesting that staff review the design. Just conditions, both saying that it's subject to the approval of the city attorney. The city attorney as to the indemnity and the traffic engineer with respect to the scope of their review.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Mr. Garcia. All right, a couple things. First off, in terms of precedent, it's always a good thing to be concerned about, to be cautious. One of the things that is always emphasized whenever we deal with conditional use permits or variances is we always make it a point, and I'm glad we have the opportunity today, to emphasize that it is a specific property in a specific location of which the findings help us. The things that help me get past the fear of precedent is we are going to be specific. You know, we're talking a major arterial street, we're talking downward slope of La Crescenta approaching the property. There's enough things there that I'm not worrying about opening Pandora's box or whatever cliche we want to attach to it. I'm also pleased with the way that the process went with this. And we've got a process that's working. We've got an applicant, a property owner that's trying to be responsible to their tenants, but also sensitive to city requirements. When they first came here, they wanted to take the barrier that they had in place with the sign that was thrown up on it and have that approved. And they quickly realized that there was reasonable objections on the part of the commission to that. They immediately said, fine, we don't need the sign, and fine, we understand that what we've put in place is kind of cobbled together. We want to do it right. And they took a few months. They hired a structural engineer. They went through the process, and they've come back with what I consider a well-considered design and a well-considered approach to a potential safety hazard. So I'm encouraged by what they've done, and I'm also encouraged by the process in terms of being able to grant the variance. I would support the conditions that we've already established. I would note two other conditions at this point. One, that even though it was noted in the testimony, we should make it a condition that the reinforcing will be a number 5 bar at 16-inch on center horizontally and vertically. And also that the structural engineer would observe the installation of the reinforcing prior to the actual placement of the concrete. Beyond that, just very quickly hitting on the findings, the 4 findings we have are practical difficulties or unnecessary hardships. Well, I certainly agree with the perceived safety problem. We've had several accidents over the last couple of years, one as recently as September. Now, they managed to avoid the wall, but nonetheless, the accidents are happening. And I think the practical difficulty of moving the building speaks for itself. Unique about the property, it was approved, the property was developed a number of years ago. In subsequent times, speeds, traffic volume, and everything else has increased on the streets. I, again, with the concern of safety, find that it is a unique property. Granting the variance detrimental to the public welfare, I think to the contrary, it would be good for the public welfare, certainly of the people living on the other side of the barrier wall, and with the objective of the granting, keeping with the objective of the applicable regulations. Again, it just goes back to public welfare, public safety. They've got something that's not going to be an eyesore to the community. They've minimized the height. They're doing everything they can to make it beautiful. They're demonstrating that they're a responsible property owner with the other improvements they've made to their complex. So I can certainly support the overturning the zoning administrator's denial and approving it with the conditions that we've already stated. Any other comments from commissioners, or can I call for a motion? And
Are we ready to actually write the findings?
Well,
The verbiage of the findings, or should?
Well, I think we're in pretty good shape.
Because the motion provided seems to be
I think
findings for conditional use.
what has happened in terms of full disclosure, Mr. Torgerson, is that we took the applicant's findings, and during the course of the conversation, staff, with their proactiveness, went through and has made some comments, some corrections, embellished, took what the things we were saying during our deliberation,
fixed it
and
behind
has
my back.
fixed it a little bit. And it looks to me like Mr. Lee is prepared to read it into the record, and if there's anything we disagree with, we can tweak it as he goes through it.
I'm all over that.
Very good. Mr. Lee?
I'm not a good note taker, but I'll give it a shot.
We'll make a motion, please do.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion upon review and consideration of all materials and exhibits of a current record relative to setback variance, case number PBAR 2007-036, located at 2800 Montrose Avenue, and after having conducted an appeal hearing on said matter, that the Commission hereby reverses the zoning administrator's decision and approves said setback variance case number PBAR 2007-036 based on the following findings pursuant to Title 30, Chapter 30.42.030, Glendale Municipal Code. And before I read those four conditions, I'd like to also make it part of the approval. As Chairman Kane has indicated, that the structure engineer referring to spacing and strengthening of the reinforcing bar to number 5 and 16 inches on center, I think is the correct number.
Mm-hmm.
And also, before the fully grouting all cells, the inspection from the City of Glendale is required?
From the structural engineer.
Structural engineer.
It's not
I
permitted
see.
from the city.
Oh, I see. Okay, so before grouting, the cells, that the structural engineer be present at the site to inspect the work. And number 3 condition is the third condition is to set back 12 inches from the sidewalk for the planting area. And what about the condition with the city attorney and traffic department?
Just say that the appellant enters into an agreement with an indemnification agreement satisfactory to the city attorney.
That. Did you get that?
Mr. Garcia, friendly comment on it?
Just indemnity agreement, indemnifying the city for any liability arising out of any accidents.
Okay, so the indemnity agreement from the owner to I guess, relieve of any responsibilities or liabilities from the city.
You might just say, as so just stated by Mr. Garcia.
Okay.
I've learned never to try to
okay.
argue with the attorneys. So.
What Mr. Garcia said.
What he said, yeah.
Okay, the four conditions, the corner of La Crescenta Avenue and Montrose Avenue has experienced at least 2 car accidents within the past 2 years, one of which resulted in a vehicle crashing into our property directly into unit number 69, as well as an accident in September of this year. This traffic barrier will protect the residents' welfare and the property from sustaining major damage or accidental death. That was the first finding. Second finding, the property involved has already been the victim of 2 vehicle accidents that have caused property damage. The property is situated at the bottom of a steep decline causing the unusual traffic hazard. The barrier will assist in preventing a vehicle from crashing into the property and possibly causing unnecessary injuries or death and property damages. The third finding, granting of this variance will protect the public welfare in forming a barrier between out-of-control vehicles and the property. There is no detriment to the public welfare. The fourth finding.
Now or when he's done?
Just
Mr.
to
Garcia,
comment
want
on
to
that last finding with respect to preventing damage or injury, I think that the finding should say that it's going to minimize the risk of death, damage, or injury, not that it's going to prevent it, because
minimize
it's stated on the record.
All right. So
anything can happen.
we'll assist in minimizing. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
It's a good thing someone's listening.
Right. The fourth finding, the purpose of the barrier is to reduce damage to residential property and reduce the danger to the health and safety of residents. The variance process allows for exceptions to setbacks regulations to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. That's it.
All right.
How did I do?
Sounds good. Mr. Garcia?
I wasn't sure if there was, one of the conditions was to not allow the sign.
Oh, and the sign is denied.
Yes, yes.
Quite
the sign is
appropriate to
denied.
point
Yes,
that
that's
out.
correct.
And also, Chairman Kane, was there a specific condition to provide landscape? Or I heard the mentioning of landscape with the setback, but that you want to make that a specific separate condition? And do you have in mind what type of plants, or will you leave that to staff?
Plans by staff, but the intent is
yeah.
to landscape that 12-inch.
Yes, yeah, for the staff to approve and review and approve.
And that will be just along the front of the wall, or?
That's correct.
Okay.
Right. As is right now, you got a pretty ugly site, yeah, butting up against the sidewall.
Any other comments? Seeking a second to the motion.
Was it one on a finished material?
They've, you know what, we should condition that it be,
Okay.
that it be a slate as suggested by the appellant, or whatever finish is satisfactory to the planning department
Okay, yeah.
and/or urban planner.
We'll make one more condition, and that is the facing of the wall will be as suggested by the engineer, either slate or the material that is approved by the planning department.
Okay, perfect. Now, we have a motion. Could we have support, please?
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion, second, call roll.
Commissioner Sheets,
Aye.
Commissioner Torgerson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lee,
Aye.
Commissioner Berman,
Aye.
and Chair Kane.
Aye, and a vote of 5-0. The zoning administrator has been overturned with conditions on the PVAR 2007-036 standard and setback variance. Moving on to new business, zoning code amendment case PZON 2008-010. It's within the city of Glendale, and it is amendments to Title 30 of the Glendale Municipal Code 1995 relating to revisions to landscaping requirements. There you are. And staff is represented by Kristen Nassy. A recommendation to, well, tell us what it's a recommendation to.
This will be, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. This will be a recommendation to City Council on the proposed ordinance and the changes. So to back up just a bit, a while back, staff was directed to develop an ordinance examining alternatives to our landscape standards to address the need for water conservation. So working with the Planning Department, Glendale Water and Power, and Neighborhood Services, we worked together and drafted this ordinance. Additionally, we created and also worked with a landscape advisory group to review the proposed amendments. And the landscape advisory group was made up of professional landscape architects and designers. Briefly, the proposed amendments do not make significant changes to the current landscape standards or rules, but really they provide more direction to property owners so that they know what's expected of them with respect to required landscaping. The main change that I'll cover, and that's on page 1 of the ordinance that's in your packet, is to the street setback area in single-family zones. The language is amended from stating fully landscaped to landscape with a combination of plant materials and permeable surfaces. Also establishing a threshold at a majority of that area, or more than 50%, has to be composed of live plant material. These changes will support drought-tolerant and xeriscape landscaping designs in keeping with the need for water conservation. It also introduces the use of non-plant ground covers like wood chips used in combination with plant materials. Again, these changes are not significant. Permeable surfaces and non-plant ground cover have always been permitted in the code, but this language is amended to clarify the existing requirements and encourage other alternatives for required landscaping besides just lawn or turf, while also encouraging water conservation. This is just an interim step to give flexibility to property owners when they're trying to balance the decision of what plant materials they want in relation to water use. But really, what's left to come is for staff to examine our rules, and we'll make changes in the future that comply with the state's direction with their Water Conservation and Landscaping Act by 2010. So that'll be our next steps in the coming year. So during this process, the topic of artificial turf was suggested as an alternative material to landscaping, again in response to water conservation. The topic of artificial turf was discussed with the Landscape Advisory Group. They did have some concerns that related specifically to the potential poor appearance of the product. What is the longevity of it? Does it fade? The varying levels of quality that are out there on the market. The potential of leaching of lead from the product. The use of artificial turf on slopes. When it's on a slope, it has the potential to not drain properly. The filling that's used in the product can sort of crumb up and gather at the base of a slope. And also the idea of creating these areas that obtain or absorb and retain heat, thereby sort of creating its own little heat island. So the recommendation from the Landscape Advisory Group was if artificial turf is to be permitted, they felt that it was only appropriate in the rear yards, and they also pointed out that artificial turf was not appropriate beneath tree canopies. There's an incompatibility with the installation of the artificial turf and existing tree roots. And also that it not be counted towards the live plant material requirement overall for landscaping, but not considered as live plant material. So sort of running with that recommendation, staff has outlined some other options for the commission to consider with respect to artificial turf and whether or not you want to consider it with this ordinance. The first option would be to permit artificial turf when it is not visible from the public right-of-way when you're immediately adjacent to a property. This area would count towards the overall landscaping requirement, very similar to permeable surfaces, which we count now, but it would, again, not count as live plant material, and also add language that would prohibit it beneath tree canopies. The second option would be to not permit it in any required setback area, so your street front, your street side, in the back of a property, your interior property lines. This could leave some areas that are visible from the street. Any distance beyond a required front setback and maybe to a building, there's potential for that area to be visible from the street. And again, similar to the first option, it would count towards overall landscaping, but not live plant material, and also prohibited beneath tree canopies. The third option would be to add language to the code that just strictly prohibits artificial turf. And the fourth option would be to make some real minor code revisions, but really it's just more for clarification. Currently, our code doesn't address artificial turf, but if somebody did install it, it's not that it would be prohibited, it's just that it would not count towards your landscaping requirement. We could also add, with this option, add some language that artificial turf not be permitted in the ROS and R1R zoning districts. These properties are generally located in the hillsides, and by prohibiting it in those zones, it would address the potential slope incompatibilities. And the third, consistent with the options of 1 and 2, prohibited beneath all tree canopies. So that outlines the minor changes to the actual ordinance, and then also outlines some of the options to consider for artificial turf.
Please.
The 50% rule that you just talked about, I've seen this yard or even the public area where they've gone to cactus plants and or rocks. So I see more rock than the plants. How does that play into this? I mean, it's also definitely water conservation.
It is water conservation. The cactus would be considered live plant material. So just in that area that you're referring to, at least 50% of that area, based on these revisions, would need to be made up of cactus. So some sort of calculation would need to be done. And
so do you calculate the vertical height of the cactus, or do you diameter?
In the plan view, you would use the area on the ground.
So this neighbor that I saw, then he's clearly in violation. Then
potentially.
Yeah, okay.
Then, just to write on one of my questions, so in other words, it's the drip line of a tree or shrub that represents the 50%?
Yes.
Okay. And at what age, for example, a tree, an 18-inch tree or an 18-inch container tree is going to take, decades to grow to a certain size. So when you do your calculation, are you basing it on a mature tree?
You're basing it on
away?
Today's, when it's planted.
So if they put an 18-inch, their drip line is about 1.5 feet.
It is, and we had this discussion because we didn't want somebody to come in and maybe make the argument of planting one tree in the center of their yard and saying, at maturity, in 50 years from now, it's going to cover, it's going to cover more than 50% of this area. So it will be at today's standard.
Okay. Any other initial questions for staff?
Yes.
Please.
I notice there's two issues here. There's an ordinance change, and the motion has to do with the ordinance change. Then the second issue is consideration and discussion of artificial turf. So there's no motion desired for that. You want us to just tell you our favorite options for?
We're looking for a recommendation from the Planning Commission to City Council on how to consider artificial turf related to the landscape ordinance.
Okay, but you don't have any ordinance changes for us to look at?
That's why we've outlined some options, and based on the direction with the options, we'll draft some language to incorporate into that.
Okay, so if we made a motion, we would make two motions. One motion for the ordinance and the language revisions that you presented us, and the second motion would be for the...
Mr. Torgerson,
I imagine you could do it that way.
Recommendation, I think we can combine them.
Okay.
Now, we can put our comments in as far as the draft ordinance, and then our comments in at the same time as it relates to the
final motion will include.
So we just need one motion. Okay. Thank you.
Seeing no other questions at this time, we'll have speakers. We've got one card. Stephanie?
Good evening, Chairman Kane and Commissioners. I'm Stephanie Landrigan. I'm a practicing landscape architect. I also instruct architects, and I have been involved in AB 1881, which is part of the code that deals with water conservation in the state. And I'm here in support of the recommendations that staff has put forward. And I would also like to make a couple of comments on the options for artificial turf. I was just most recently misquoted in about 600 articles around the nation on artificial turf. But it was only a typo. But in essence, fortunately...
People have gone to death for such things.
Yes, they have. So, but it's really kind of, the multiplicity of it is pretty embarrassing. But one of the things that I would like to just bring to your attention is that we as a city are really trying to become sustainable, and we are looking at this in a holistic manner. And to look at this holistically, we have to look at the site planning and what we put on that site. And if we are going to be sustainable, we have to ask, is artificial turf going to fit in that definition? And I think all of us agree that that is probably not the case. It has no real habitat benefit, and it also has a lot of disadvantages, which is it is a heat island effect. It's made out of recycled petroleum byproducts. It is not ecologically sound. And what is its life cycle? And if you look at it in a full cycle of cradle to cradle, how much water does it take to make it to save water here? So if we were going to really look at it in that manner that we want to, as the city eventually reach, I think that we would want to discourage it. Understanding that there are personal ideals of beauty, and there's this new word that I discovered that I wanted to share with you, which was coined by Robert Cowan. It's called butility. Not very well used, but it has been coined, and it means beauty and utility. And in some ways, I think that's why people are choosing artificial turf. They see it as something that is pretty and also utilitarian. It fits, it percolates. But I think we need to look at it in a larger manner. So I would like to discourage you from allowing it to be part of what people look at and the reason that we have landscaping guidelines in the front, which is to set a moderate standard of aesthetics. And it may meet one of those standards, but I don't think it meets enough of the next eye. It doesn't meet the nexus that we really expect for having the landscape guidelines. So I would like to discourage you from the other options that are prepared there and encourage you to, if you would like to allow it and you think that it should be a personal preference, to allow it in the backyard. And I thank you for your attention today.
Questions for the speaker? Were you on the committee?
I was invited to be on the committee. I was unable to attend because I was out of town, but I sent them copious notes, which they were gracious enough to incorporate in the recommendations.
All right. I kind of pretty much lean toward what your statements have been in terms of the front yard, but allowing it for use in the backyard. But even within that, one of the concerns has been, and I kind of go back to what's happened with football fields. When the Astrodome was first built, the first generation of AstroTurf was really bad. Really? And they call it Astro Concrete for a reason. And, things have gotten better. And we have some pretty good products now. I mean, there's a lot of casinos like the Wynn in Vegas that are using it and that type of stuff. But I'm really still concerned over quality and life cycle and so on. And with that stuff still unknown, and that, I think, forever going to be a problem, I'd be really reluctant about front yards. Now, what are you experiencing in terms of quality? What are people telling you? Because you're dealing with these people coming in front of you probably on a weekly basis.
Well, actually, I brought back from one of the trade shows that I was in Philadelphia, where there were more people who were selling turf grass than there were selling real grass, which is kind of amazing. And what I think it doesn't address is there's such a range there that you could have an extremely lovely product and put it there, and it may have a lifetime of 15 years. It also could serve many of the purposes that we think are really important in the front yard, the aesthetics, the perkability, but it still does require being irrigated. It should be washed off. It does not biodegrade. If you throw up on it, if you spit on it, if there's scat on it, it does not break down. So it's not, how would you disinfect it? Those are elements that if you have young children or...
It's your front yard.
To be, as graphic as I can in front of television. But the reality is it does serve no biological function. And to look at it that way, I mean, we have real problems. I mean, grass doesn't serve a whole lot of biological functions. It doesn't support a whole lot of life. It's not really a habitat element. But I think that what we've encouraged in the rewriting of these is to use live plants that create a biodiversity that will invite beneficial insects, that will invite birds, songbirds, and I don't see turf grass ever doing that. So I really see that as bringing a big loss to our environment here. If you have birds who come to the oak trees, they need the microenvironment that supports the oak tree to continue to survive, because whatever is going to keep the oak tree strong has little subcultures of microcosms and birds and bugs and bees, and we're removing that in our goal to have one issue addressed. And I think we need to be a little broader in answering that question that we have.
All right. Any other comments from the commissioners? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anything that staff would like to add? Otherwise, I'll ask the commissioners to kind of ring in on what their thoughts are.
No, nothing. Only thing I can add is amen.
Amen. All right. Well, in terms of ending the prayer, is there anything you'd like to start out with? Perhaps in an Alleluia fashion in terms of any comments or thoughts on the ordinance. And what do you think about artificial grass?
Exactly what she does.
Okay. Well, that's
I'm trying to shorten
succinct.
my time here.
Well done. All right. Who'd like to go next?
Well, I guess we'll go in this order.
All right.
I
And by the way,
I just wanna
remind me
make one
next
statement.
week we'll start from there.
One of my favorite landscape architects, a friend of mine, is Lawrence Halpern. Today he'd be banned from putting in waterfalls and all that nice stuff that we see all over the world.
Yeah,
I'm a libertarian.
I guess my personal preferential, preferences would be to actually ban the whole thing. The artificial turf. When you talk about landscaping, I think about natural, grass and natural plants where you got birds and bees, that your parents talk to you about. But anyways, the person's home is their castle. If they want to do something in the backyard, I have no qualms about that. So I think does that fall into a second category or?
No, I think that follows through kind of what the conversation is.
My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty. That's what we used to sing as a child, but that's not anymore.
Anything else to add? All right. Ordinance, no comments. You're fine with what they're proposing?
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Mr. Torgerson.
I have no problem with the proposed ordinance, and on the AstroTurf, my preference would be no AstroTurf or artificial turf. It's a brand name, artificial turf whatsoever would be the first choice. Second choice is if you got to allow it, specifically don't allow it in ROS and R1R in the hillsides. We don't need AstroTurf and the drainage problems and everything that would make possible. Other than that, if outside of the R1R and ROS zones in the flatlands, if somebody wants to do something in the privacy of their own backyard, I just don't want to see it. So that would be my preference on the...
That applies to so many things in life.
Just so many things. I just TMI. I just don't want to know about it. I don't want to see it. So I don't want AstroTurf in any visible area. And so that would be the third order of
Okay.
precedence in these.
Mr. Sheets.
I agree. I think one of the things that sticks in my mind is even if we allow it in the back, I think in an effort to be simple and conserve water and do the right things, we end up with problems which were stated during the review by the group. We end up with issues and problems from a nature standpoint, and also just the way it looks. People don't realize what problems they're going to have to deal with once they have the fake turf in their yard for a while, and where it fades and where it peels up and deteriorates, and then it costs more to maintain that. So I think they missed the bet in doing that for an initial shot that it looks kind of nice for a while. So my first look would be not at all, but I have a tendency to lean, same as Commissioner Lee, that if somebody wants to do it in their backyard, because there are various reasons. They might want to do it for a child's play area or something like that, and I could probably go along with that.
Small area?
Yes, a small.
Not for the dog pen.
Especially not.
All right, thank you. Again, no problems with the wording of the ordinance. My question had been just making sure in the definition what 50% was based on. That was addressed earlier. In terms of the artificial turf, echoing everyone else's comments, the only reason that I would allow it in the backyard is, again, for personal property rights. If it's not hurting anyone else, let them do what they want. Given that it does have perhaps, how many years they want to say it'll last, whether it's 10 years or 15 years, whatever, it has, a certain time that it'll be in. People remodel and re-landscape all the time anyway. And I could see specific uses that might evolve over time, whether it's child play area or whatever crazy reasons people are coming up with it, to at least allow them within their own yard to do what they'd like. So I'm hearing that we probably have that same sentiment, that we're pretty much unanimous on that. Unless anybody wants to add any other comments, I'll just entertain a motion, or a motion to recommend with the comments that we've made on the turf as well. Yes?
Mr. Chair, I do have one question, just for clarification. So it sounds like the rear yard, is there any more discussion by the commission about prohibiting it in the R1R and ROS zones?
I definitely think that's a good idea because of the hillside, the concern of the
Okay,
hillside.
so that's why I'm looking for clarification.
Yeah, that's actually a good catch. I mean, the only thing that gives me hesitation is the generally. In other words, there are properties that would be affected by us banning it that are on the flats.
And then they could do a variance.
And exactly. That would be the only out on that. So it would be the point of banning it. The only thing I would want to do is just be proactive like you've done here, is the reason it would be prohibited in ROS and R1R was because of hillside slope. And that variances could be entertained, for any of the properties, but could be especially entertained for residences within that area that are on a flat slope, or nearly flat.
Okay.
Motion, please.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move that upon consideration of the proposed ordinance relating to revisions of landscaping requirements, the Planning Commission hereby recommends the City Council adopt the proposed amendments to Title 30 of the Glendale Municipal Code, 1995. And in addition, the discussion, the City Council should be advised of our discussion, and the preferences for these four options seem to be number 3 would be the first preference.
Okay.
Number 4 would
Well,
be...
no. I don't think you can say that. We're letting people do stuff in their backyard. We've all said...
Well, we all said that we'd like to see it prohibited, but the City Council would like it to be allowed in certain cases, then we would have to say number 1 and number 4 ought to be combined.
Now you've got me looking.
That's the...
About what 4 was.
Just don't let anybody see it. But if you're living in a hillside, don't do it at all.
Okay.
The fourth option had the
Yeah,
ROS, RR.
That's the hillside part of it.
Right,
Got it.
right. That's a pretty lousy motion, but that's the gist of it.
That's only a recommendation.
I'll second.
All right, motion and support, call roll.
Commissioner Sheets.
Aye.
Commissioner Torgerson.
Aye.
Commissioner Lee.
Aye.
Commissioner Berman.
Aye.
Chair Kane.
Aye, on a vote of 5-0, the Planning Commission has recommended the changes to Amendment Title 30 of the Glendale Municipal Code and has also made comments relating to the proposed use of artificial turf. Number 9, Planning Department updates.
I believe that you received in your packets a list of zoning administrative decisions.
For the last month or so, yep.
The agenda for the next meeting is not completely set yet, and the January 7th meeting is canceled due to Eastern Rite Christmas falling on January 6th and the council meeting moving to the 7th.
And right now, there does appear to be an appeal coming in December.
Yes, possibly one or more appeals involving the same property. On,
Oh, yeah.
Where's that property?
When is the next meeting?
1449 Elmira.
2 weeks from today's,
Oh.
third Wednesday, 17th.
Yeah, the property is subject of appeals of both of denial of a variance by the zoning administrator of an FAR, increased FAR, as well as zoning administrator's denial of an administrative exception to allow construction of a garage without code-required turning radius. For one of the
Okay, that
spaces.
was, I think that was in our package.
It is, actually.
Yeah, it's, well,
The initial action was.
the final agenda is not yet set, but,
Understood. All right. Anything else?
sir.
Comments from commissioners?
I had one question. I happened to hear some comments about the cell towers at council, and I didn't know how that would match up. I know I had requested that we put something on the agenda to discuss the towers and some factors around cleaning them and maintaining them. I didn't know if that would conflict or cause an issue, and it should be included in that, incorporated, or would this be separate?
Yeah, I think it would be separate. Commissioner Sheets, the inquiry that the council made was what was the scope of the city's discretion vis-a-vis these mobile cell towers in residential areas and the public rights-of-way, given the fact that there are some limiting laws, the Federal Telecommunications Act. So our office is working with Public Works to get that information to the council, so that won't interfere with the planning department's workload.
And as for the maintenance, we have looked at our past approvals, we've been looking in the code for general maintenance language, and we've asked the Parks Department also to look at their contracts for maintenance language.
Thank you. That's all.
All right. Anything else, gentlemen? Nope. Entertain a motion to adjourn, please. We are adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you.